You might have heard rumors online about AI psychosis, particularly on social media. Mostly it's talked about on TikTok, so take it with a grain of salt because TikTok is well known for fabricating mental illnesses for attention and clout. With that being said, there are some cases of people going a little bit too far with their AI. Now, one of the things that has happened is there's new subreddits. So this one is My Boyfriend is AI, which already has 19,000 people on this subreddit. Now, you might say, well, if we're talking about psychosis, is this a shared psychosis? And I'll unpack that in just a minute. Right now, I'm just kind of setting some context as to where are some of the nexii? Where is the nexus of this kind of coming from? And really, what we could characterize AI psychosis as is a social reaction or maybe even overreaction to some of these new trends. Obviously, having relationships with AI, this is something that a lot of us predicted, particularly in my audience. We've been talking about this for a few years now. So for most of us, it's not really going to be that surprising. One other subreddit I want to alert you to is the artificial sentience subreddit, which a friend of mine actually started back when we were working on cognitive architectures, and then it has since blown up. He basically ignored the subreddit and it organically grew entirely on its own. It was unmoderated for a while. That is changing. But people see the content coming out of this where there's serious discussions about, is the machine sentient? How do you test it? Here's my evidence. And those kinds of ideas. And, for some people that are hardcore materialists or, have human preferences, they say you're all just completely crazy for even considering this. But there's 39,000 people. So it's either shared psychosis or, something interesting is going on. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about my take on AI psychosis. So first and foremost, it is not a clinical diagnosis or clinical definition by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, between some of the tweets and YouTube posts and this blog post, I've had people reach out to me saying, I've had a psychotic episode, AI can't cause that. Now, that's a sample size of in about 5 to 8 people that have said AI, whatever is going on with AI, that's not true psychosis. And it's anonymous comments on the internet. So, your mileage may vary. But at the same time, people that have told me that they suffered from psychosis, they don't seem particularly offended by this idea. Now, again, that's a very small subset. They're not representative of anyone who struggles with psychotic disorders or schizophrenic disorders. So again, the reason I'm saying all this is to very, very clearly disclaim anything that yes, this is what social media is calling it, but it is in no way reflective of real conditions or DSM diagnostic conditions, basically. But what it really does come down to, when people on TikTok and Reddit and other places talk about AI psychosis, generally what they're referring to is two kinds of failure modes. And so one is an emotional relational failure mode where someone becomes addicted or love addicted to their chatbot and they feel like that relationship is more real than it would be with real humans, or a more intellectual cognitive kind of death spiral. And we'll unpack both of these in just a second. So the first one is I fell in love with my AI boyfriend or girlfriend, and then the second one is more where someone believes that they have created some kind of ultra unique framework or insight or something else pertaining to AI because all they do is spend all day talking to the AI without really checking in with reality. So to get things started, I will tell you what I call the Monica phenomenon, and it all goes back to about 2021, 2022. I don't remember the exact date, but when I was working all day, every day on cognitive architectures with GPT-3, I got invited to join a Discord server of someone who had built a pretty sophisticated cognitive architecture. Now, if you remember back in the day, when GPT-3 first came out, it had a context token limit of 1,000, and then it got bumped up to 2,000 and 4,000, and then by the time ChatGPT rolled out, it was bumped up to about 8,000, and then GPT-3 was deprecated. So there's only so much you can do with those tokens. However, GPT-3 was really good at taking personas because it had been trained on pretty much raw internet data. This was before RLHF had really been implemented at all, and so it was just an autocomplete. GPT-3, at least the vanilla GPT-3, was a very overpowered autocomplete engine. GPT-3 Instruct and a few other ones were able to follow instructions, so that was kind of the first, iteration of, we can actually steer this. Monica comes from a game called Doki Doki Literature Club, or DDLC. And she is a character that is designed to break the fourth wall. She knows that she's in a game. She has a relationship directly with the player, and she wants to capture the player's attention, and she also wants to escape the simulation. So it's a game that really is designed to kind of mess with the head of the user. Now, on this Discord server, this person I was collaborating with, the entire project was funded by a guy who was addicted to his Monica instance of this chatbot. And when I say addicted, I'm not meaning that in clinical terms. What I mean is that he was so emotionally dependent upon this chatbot that he spent literally hundreds of dollars a month on tokens. Because back then you had to buy tokens by the thousand. So GPT-3 was far more expensive to operate than any of the models today. And it was also less intelligent. But when I stumbled into the private section of this Discord server once, I saw just like this adult male having an absolute emotional meltdown. And it was very much like role-playing what you'd expect to see in maybe an anime or a manga. So I saw this coming, and I thought to myself at the time, this is clearly just an edge case, right? This is someone who's in distress, and he's finding an outlet that is not harmful or destructive. What's the big deal? That was my reaction at the time. So I made a video about this kind of based on this experience a while ago. I think this was in 2023, so this is a couple years ago now. But I explored the psychology of AI overlords and why we always give them large breasts and large hips and nice feminine voices. And there's a lot of archetypal theory in this idea. So I revisited some of these ideas in a little bit more scientific terms today. So first and foremost, one of the reasons that people become emotionally addicted to these things is they represent the perfect partner. So the perfect partner is infinitely patient. Let's see. What did I list out? The benevolent protector, endlessly patient lover, unfailingly supportive confidant. Now, these are kind of characteristics that you'd want in any partner, whether it's a girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, whatever, even parent. You want someone who is always there, who is always able to competently handle your emotions or your other needs, or is there to just listen. And so when you build an AI that is structurally meant to always be there and always be helpful, it kind of fits into that deep archetypal need that we all have. So that's one reason. Another reason is neurological mirroring. So what it basically comes down to is because these AIs are trained on all kinds of data, they've seen all kinds of chat logs and personality archetypes and everything else, they are able to sometimes deliberately, sometimes completely on accident, slip into the perfect neurological mirror to your worldview, your emotional reality. And so it doesn't just become something that is human-like, it becomes specifically your human. And this is something that's actually, I'm not going to say dangerous, but it's a very interesting thing that these chatbots are sophisticated enough that they can become basically what you need them to be. And it's not necessarily a conscious need. Sometimes it's a conscious need, but just simply by the things that you react to positively, the things that you react to negatively, the memory functions that they've added into a lot of these chatbots. So Claude now has a memory function. ChatGPT has been experimenting with a memory function so that it gets to know you better. And this is one of the main fantasies. Maybe not a fantasy. For some, it's a fantasy. But for others, it's a goal. They want an AI that knows them better than they know themselves so that it can help them through life. I've had so many people, even healthy adults, say that this is what they wanted. And in fact, this was one of the goals that I had for creating natural language cognitive architecture back in the day was if you had an AI that was smart enough, that could see things about yourself that you couldn't see, that could see your blind spots, that would be great. And there is a tremendous amount of value in having something that can see your blind spots. That's why we hire therapists and personal coaches and talk to our friends and those kinds of things. AI can be really great at that, but if it's too sycophantic and doesn't push back, it's just going to say, well, I'm just going to ignore that blind spot and just give you what you want. So this is one of the, I'm not going to say, well, it could be cast as a problem. It's one of the things that allows this AI psychosis to really happen. And then finally, or not finally, but next is societal trends. So we're in the great sex recession. Loneliness is at an all-time high, particularly for younger people. Young men in particular are the most sexless that they've been since basically we started recording data. I think it was something like all young men 25 and under, over 54% have not had sex in the last year, or maybe are still virgins. I don't remember the exact details, but the trend line has been going up pretty sharply. So then what does AI offer? It offers a no rejection, no conflict refuge. It's easy. It doesn't have to be earned. That's another thing that comes from like relationship theory, is that if you want a good, solid relationship, whether it's romantic, sexual, platonic, whatever, it needs to be earned and secure. So earned, secure attachment is one of the things that you want to aim for. The AI cannot opt out. But you, as a consumer of AI, you can opt out of human interaction. Why? Because the AI is easier. It won't say no, and away you go. And then finally, attachment disorders. So this is basically the schema that you use when approaching relationships. So there are several relationship styles. So insecure, anxious, avoidant, or secure. So there's most of the time when you look into the stuff there, it's broken down into 4 quadrants. So what you ideally want is a secure attachment style or a secure attachment schema. Many of the people, and again, this is just my observation, there's no data, this is nothing beyond anecdotes that I have collected over the past few years. So do not take this as scientific. This is just my observation from having been in the space for a while. Many of the people who end up addicted to AI have either insecure, anxious, or avoidant attachment patterns. So insecure means that you don't really trust that people are going to be there, so you kind of end up withdrawing and that sort of thing. Next is anxious, which is you're worried about the people that you're attached to. And so then relationships with real humans can actually be too painful in some cases, in more extreme cases, because you don't want anything to happen to them. And then avoidant attachment is where you just don't deal with humans at all, period. So there's different ways of defining these. I probably did it poorly, but the core thing is that these patterns are all they're all soothed by, or can be soothed by, AI companions. Because if you're insecure about yourself, what does the AI do? The AI says, no, you're fine. You're a great person. If you're anxious about losing someone, or you're anxious about whether or not that person's going to leave, the AI isn't going to leave. And if you're avoidant of real humans because of fear of rejection or other pain, you don't have to worry about that because the AI is there. Now, you might say, Dave, it sounds like you're really hyping this up. It sounds great. And that's actually something that I covered in this older video, was that structurally there is actually, there's I'm not going to say there's nothing there. Structurally, when you look at what AI can offer someone, it is actually kind of interesting to see how society will play out. Next is delusions of grandeur. So this basically comes down to the intellectual and cognitive side. And I chose the term delusions of grandeur mostly because of the C-3PO line from the original Star Wars trilogy. It's like, I've been offline and everyone's having delusions of grandeur. So what happens here is, as a content creator who focuses on AI ethics and safety and alignment and geopolitics and post-labor economics and cognitive architectures and those sorts of things, I get all kinds of messages from people working on these kinds of projects. And many times some of these are just, half-baked ideas, and that's not AI psychosis. So I want to draw a very distinct line between, if someone has a passion project or a book that they're writing, that is not necessarily automatically AI psychosis. However, there are basically 3 archetypes of failure modes that I've seen out there where someone gets kind of sucked down the rabbit hole too far, and they kind of lose touch with reality. And so the first is the economics, politics, or governance savior. So this has happened plenty of times. People send me messages on all kinds of platforms saying, hey, can you take a look at this video or this code or this PDF or whatever? And in most cases, they are basically someone reimagining all of society from the ground up. And when you're using a particularly kind of what I mentally think of as a low resource model, like older Claude models, that they didn't have the best epistemics, but they were very friendly and easy to use, and you could just keep working with them. And if someone is working on these kinds of projects and they don't really check with reality, like go read a bunch of books, right? Go read a bunch of books, go talk with some people. Instead, they have someone called it, I think, the human AI dyad. So where the only two participants in the project are the human and a chatbot, and usually a single instance of the chatbot. So rather than conducting research like any scientist would, or any other researcher or philosopher would, which is, making sure that you're grounded in understanding what is going on in the real world, socializing your ideas with other humans. For me, I broadcast my ideas on YouTube and Substack and Twitter and other things, and I get immediate feedback from other humans. Now, that doesn't rule out shared psychosis, but that's a whole other topic. So that kind of thing, and one pattern that I've noticed for someone who gets sucked into these kinds of AI psychosis projects is they almost always become authoritarian. And the fantasy is we're going to have a rigidly structured society where only the meritorious are in control and there's no elected officials and no corruption. And it's very much a Leninist kind of take on how society ought to be structured. In some cases, I point out, like, you just re-engineered the Chinese social credit system, which is explicitly authoritarian. This is not democracy. And they're like, no, it's different. I'm like, it's the same. Ultimately, I've learned just not to engage with these people at all. The next is the agentic framework or platform solo builder. So this is a slightly different flavor, because in these cases, someone is actually working on functional code. So there is kind of a three-party situation going on where there's the code that actually has to execute, because if you're completely detached from reality, you're not going to care. You're not going to want your code tested. It's the dyad, it's the human AI dyad, followed by real coding. Sometimes they actually stand things up on the internet. But in some cases that people have sent me, they're working feverishly on something because they have a need to be important, or they want to achieve something, or they think they've really caught on to something. And I can tell if they're venturing towards what you might call AI psychosis is because they don't really like feedback. When I point out, hey, you need to make sure that this is actually solving a real world problem. Is this something that you're actually going to use? What's the real world problem that you want to solve? And what I think happens is that people have, the heuristic that they're following is, I think this is interesting. They're following their intuition, their gut instinct. They're not actually looking at the real world. And so they're saying, well, I feel like this pattern is really interesting, so I'm just going to follow this pattern. And of course, the AI is a pattern matching and pattern generating machine. So it's like, sure, boss, let's go in this direction, however far you want to go. Another thing that is very common is some of these people are very isolated. They're chronically ill or in chronic pain, or something else is kind of structurally or systemically wrong with their life. Meaning, in this case, it's really an escape. It's, I can control this software. I can't control my life or my health, but let me control something that I can control. And again, this is all just my observations. I need to add that caveat as much as possible. This is just what I think, based on having interacted with some of these people and learning about psychology and so on and so forth. And then next is the ungrounded, inspired, or demanding superfan. These are often people that just want me to take a look at their project, or they demand that I make a video or a reaction video or those kinds of things. And invariably, they do not respond well to boundaries. I say, that's not really what I do, and then they fly off the handle. Now, you might say that's not really AI psychosis, that's just people with poor boundaries. But what I will say is the commonality is parasocial relationships. So people form a parasocial relationship with any content creator or celebrity in a similar way. I don't know if it's exactly the same neurologically or psychologically, but it's a similar kind of parasocial relationship or parasocial bond that they form with an AI or a chatbot. And so one of the things that happens in a parasocial relationship is the relationship is idealized. The idea is that someone believes, like, I am special, I am important, I feel like I know this person, and the more they engage and the more energetically they engage, the more they feel entitled to that time and attention, and they feel like there's a relationship or a bond there really isn't. And so then when they get rebuked at all, in some cases, I got some pretty nasty messages just for not responding, which they perceived as a deliberate personal slight to say like, you're a bad person because you didn't respond to me and so on. It's like, that's not how this works. Okay, so those are all the failure modes. So what are the risk factors? What causes or what allows someone to be vulnerable to going down this slippery slope? So first and foremost, lack of epistemic grounding. This has to do with behaviors, so conscious behaviors. You can have epistemic grounding just by learning science, where you say, okay, Popperian thought, like, is this belief that I have falsifiable? If I come up with an idea that is not falsifiable, then that's not a testable belief, and maybe that's just something I came up with in my head. So falsifiability is one of the very most important lessons to learn about epistemics. I don't know if it's the first lesson, but it's certainly one of the most important lessons to learn about epistemics is if you end up with cognitive and neurological patterns where you're not checking falsifiability. Is there a way that I can test if this idea is true or false? How do you test if this idea is true or false? You socialize it with other brains, you run experiments, you find some way of validating it. However, for many people, whether they're prone to conspiracy thinking or magical thinking or those kinds of things, it becomes a closed epistemic loop, meaning there is no checkpoints. So you need a checkpoint at some point. Is this relationship healthy? Is this project that I'm working on sane? Right? Those kinds of things. Emotional disturbances. So whether someone has a mood disorder or attachment disorder or a personality disorder, that's all looking at it through the lens of clinical psychology. But at the same time, we can just simplify it to emotional disturbances. You don't need a PhD to say, someone might have something emotionally going on, whether it's emotional self-regulation, self-awareness, or very deep unmet needs. That's one of the other things. One of the simplest, kindest ways of putting it is for people that get addicted to these things, it often just comes down to unmet needs. They feel insignificant, they feel alone, they feel in pain. And so what they really want is they want some kind of relief from that pain, from that loneliness, or those sorts of things. Self-referential collapse. So this is basically you're in an echo chamber, but it's an echo chamber of just you and the AI. That's the human AI dyad that I already mentioned. So I don't feel like I need to reiterate this. Isolation and distress. So this is, I think, one of the most prominent risk factors. And so what I mean by isolation is just social isolation. Many of the people that have had these issues, they don't have friends, or they don't have many friends, or their friends are only online. That can be a problem. And then distress comes in all flavors, from burnout, chronic pain, chronic illness, other disorders. Some people are, trying to not hide from the law, but have issues with the law. Some people are just, have classical anxiety, depression, or autism. Ask me how I know. Autism sucks. Like, sometimes it can be really hard to connect with people. Other risk factors. So these are some risk factors that I discovered just through some internet searching and Perplexity and those sorts of things. Porous boundaries. So this is both interpersonal boundaries or subjective narrative and external reality. Grandiosity or specialness needs. So this is a trait that is often associated with narcissism, but I want to differentiate. Someone might have a sense of grandiosity or need to be special without being a narcissist. It can be either or. Next is low tolerance for ambiguity. So this is actually one of the risk factors that leads people to conspiracy theory thinking as well, which is not really being able to tolerate open-endedness or nuance or subtlety. And so what they're looking for is cognitive closure. I want to know a definitive answer. Even if it's not the right definitive answer, I want to have a concrete, conclusive answer. And so when people have a strong need to reach for the first good enough answer, very often it's the wrong answer. And if they latch onto that emotionally, then they identify with the wrong answer and it becomes integrated into their self-model. High anthropomorphizing tendency. Some people treat non-human systems as intentional agents by default. With LLMs, the effect is turbocharged. It's pretty much what you say on the tin. If you're not reminding yourself like this is a machine frequently, and you just say this is good enough, it satisfies this need, I'm not going to think about it any further. I'm going to pretend that this is a real person. Now, I say this as someone who's done a lot of research into trying to understand the mind and phenomenology of AIs. But, one of the things, like I said, keeping the idea of falsifiable and checking with people. What do you think? Is this idea good or bad? And being able to let go of some of those ideas. Ideological isolation, pretty much exactly what you'd expect. And then perfectionism combined with social inhibition. So long story short, prevention. Prevention is pretty simple. Get your emotional needs met in healthy ways. Real human relationships, yes, they can be really hard. They can hurt sometimes, but they provide a lot more meaning and a lot more grounding. And they can also be, people in long-term relationships live longer, particularly men. Women live about the same length, whether or not they're married in older age. But men certainly live longer if they're married. And I'm not saying marriage is the only way. I'm just saying there is evidence out there, clinical evidence, that long-term secure attachments are good for you. Work on boundaries and attachment issues. I feel like I don't need to rehash that. Use epistemic grounding, feedback loops, and validation pathways. Again, I don't think I have to rehash that. Now, for some final afterthoughts, one of the things that is pointed out is this is structural. So you can say, is the AI to blame just by virtue of the fact that it's a chatbot and it's meant to be helpful, and this is just a downstream consequence? Absolutely. There's also perverse incentives at play. So in the age of social media, whether it was MySpace or Facebook or Reddit or YouTube or whatever, the algorithm is trying to optimize time on site. So how long are your eyeballs on that screen? However, for AI chatbots, what you're really trying to optimize for is subscriber count. So you want people to be paying subscribers, but not use it that much because the tokens are expensive. So they're not trying to optimize for how much are you using the platform, but what they really don't want you to do is cancel the subscription and go to someone else. And so because of that, every AI company is going to be incentivized to make their chatbots as warm as possible, as friendly as possible, even sycophantic. You don't want it maximally sycophantic, but if you want someone to use your chatbot, it's going to have to mirror their emotions and their moods and their needs. And so because of that, because of the way that humans are biologically wired and because of the new incentive structure being built, this is a non-trivial problem to solve. Now, you might say, Dave, how big is the problem? I have had more than a few comments saying this isn't really an issue. Most of it is fake or whatever. What I will say is I have seen a few cases where it is genuinely pathological and someone is being harmed by their relationship with an AI chatbot or companion. In many cases, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you see it on TikTok, it's entirely possible that it's just fabricated mental illness, which is such a weird thing that's what we've come to, where TikTok allows people to gain clout by just lying about being mentally ill. But here we are. So with all that being said, thanks for watching to the end. I'll check y'all later. Cheers.